Do you know that there are twice as many 100-year-old women as 100-year-old men? Now, apart from keeping the Queen busy sending telegrams, what's the reason for this? Why, generally, do women live longer than men? It's a really interesting question, but getting to the bottom of it isn't that easy. First, let's define what we're talking about here. It isn't just the case that women live longer in the UK. No, women live longer in almost every country on Earth. There are only a few places in Asia and South Africa that buck the trend. And this female survival isn't linked to sending young men to war. Even when you look at people who have reached 60 years old and left any battlefield far behind them, a woman is still likely to live longer. There are a few interesting ways to explain this. First, there's the biological explanation. It turns out females of many species live longer than the males. If you're a male black widow spider, then you'll be lucky not to be eaten by the female of the species, but the battle of the sexes isn't always that intense. So what's going on? One experimental gerontologist, a person who studies aging, has suggested that as the sex that often cares for offspring after birth, females are less disposable and so could be expected to evolve better repair and anti-aging methods. Some animal studies do back this up. Females tend to age better in many species, including the primates. Women's immune systems also seem to age slower than men's, well, at least in some small studies in Japan. Ladies might also get an advantage because they have 2 copies of the X chromosome, and us guys have swapped one out for a piddly little Y chromosome, so we're missing backup copies for a few thousand genes. Also, behaviours driven by biology could also be a factor. Men suffer greater rates of accidental and violent deaths, things like car crashes, murder, and even suicide. While we'll talk about cultural reasons for that later, we do have a couple of studies that see a pattern like this when they look at primates, and testosterone could be partly to blame for more risky or violent behaviour. That was the biological argument, but genetics and biology can't explain everything because I haven't told you one very interesting thing about women's ability to live longer. It hasn't always been the case. In medieval Japan, women lived longer than men, yeah, but in medieval Croatia, men outlived women. And in some hunter-gathering societies, women lived longer, but then started living shorter lives when they settled down to farming. And we don't really know why. Some gerontologists say that women and men's life expectancies only really started to seriously diverge around the 1870s, 1880s. Now, many scientists put that down to changes in how people die. With medicine advancing, deaths from infectious diseases and childbirth became less common, and deaths from heart disease or cancer, which tend to affect men more than women, went up. In fact, one study pinned 40% of that excess male mortality after 1880 on heart disease and strokes. Whether from genetic predisposition or just a fondness for booze and steaks, men were having more heart attacks. Smoking is also a huge factor here. It's thought to be behind 30% of the difference and can even explain some of the ways it's changed over time. In 1970s America, women had an extra 8 years of life expectancy over men, but this is now reduced to only 5, and that drop could be explained by the differences in the popularity of smoking. In the US, the peak popularity for men to smoke was in the 1930s, which results in more male deaths in those 1970s statistics. But women's peak smoking years were the 1960s, so the US only started to really see those early deaths in the noughties. And smoking could also be to blame worldwide. It's more common for men than women in every country other than Austria. We should also mention the cultural beliefs that tend to push men into dangerous situations. Us guys are often expected to be brave, to keep up with our peers and take risks, and that doesn't always end well. Ever notice that there isn't a female version of Jackass? So, this is a really interesting question, and it's fair to say that all these different influences play a role in why women tend to live longer than men. Perhaps in the future we'll all learn from women's survival strategies and more men can join the 100+ club ourselves. I'd love to know your thoughts on this. Which factor do you think is most important? Did I miss anything? Let me know in the comments below. And if you are worried about the next stage, well, how about you preserve your body? Put yourself on ice. Check out my film on cryonics for more information. See you guys soon.